Some friendships are so deep they survive everything life throws at them, except the truth. Cole Mercer thought he'd lost his best friend forever the day he chose the outlaw's path, leaving Ellis Caldwell behind to wear a sheriff's badge. For 23 years, Cole rode the desert with only his faithful dog Boone, carrying the weight of choices that couldn't be undone. Then one evening, beneath an old stone bridge, he found Ellis dying, gut-shot and abandoned by whoever left him there. As Cole knelt beside the man who'd been chasing him across 3 states, Ellis whispered something that changed everything. The woman they'd both loved. The betrayal Cole thought he understood. The real reason Ellis never caught him, even when he could have. What Ellis revealed in those final moments will break your heart. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The October sun hung low over the Sonoran desert, painting the sagebrush and barrel cacti in shades of amber and rust. Cole Mercer shifted in his weathered saddle, feeling every one of his 52 years in the ache of his lower back and the stiffness in his gun hand. Beside him, his blue Gila mix Boone padded along with the patient gait of a dog who'd learned that life was about endurance, not speed. They made an unlikely pair, the graying outlaw with his sun-carved face and the mottled grey dog whose left ear bore the scar of a long-ago encounter with a mountain cat. Both had survived by their wits and each other's company through winters that froze a man's bones and summers that could kill him with thirst. Both carried the quiet dignity that comes from facing life's hardships without complaint. Cole's horse, a sturdy Mustang mare named Socorro, picked her way carefully down the rocky slope toward what remained of the old stagecoach road. This stretch of Arizona territory had been forgotten by most folks, left to the rattlesnakes and the memories of better days. The railroad had bypassed these parts 15 years back, and with it went the hope that small settlements like Dos Cruces and Willow Springs might grow into something more than dots on a surveyor's map. It suited Cole just fine. Forgotten places were where forgotten men could disappear. The leather saddlebags behind him held everything he owned in this world: a change of clothes, some jerky and hardtack, a tin cup dented from years of use, ammunition for his Colt .45, and wrapped carefully in an old shirt, Mary Catherine's blue hair ribbon. The silk had faded over the years from its original cornflower blue to something closer to the color of winter sky, but Cole couldn't bring himself to leave it behind. It was all he had left of the woman who'd loved him once, before he became the kind of man mothers warned their daughters about. 23 years ago, Cole Mercer had been a different person entirely. Back then, he'd been just another farm boy in Copper Creek, Arizona, with calloused hands from working his father's small ranch and dreams of maybe saving enough money to buy Mary Catherine Sullivan a proper engagement ring. She was the school teacher, fresh from back east, with her gentle manners and her way of making even the roughest cowhand feel like he might be worthy of something better than Saturday night saloons and Sunday morning regrets. Cole remembered the way the afternoon light would catch in her auburn hair when she stood at the schoolhouse window, watching for her students to arrive. He remembered how her laugh sounded like water over stones in a creek bed, and how she'd blush when he brought her wildflowers he'd picked on his way into town. Simple gifts for a simple life that had seemed possible once. Ellis Caldwell had been his best friend then, closer than a brother. They'd grown up together, 2 boys whose fathers worked neighboring spreads, who'd learned to ride and rope and shoot together under the vast Arizona sky. Ellis had been the steady one, the one who thought before he acted, who could talk his way out of trouble as easily as Cole could fight his way out of it. Where Cole was quick-tempered and impulsive, Ellis was measured and thoughtful. They'd balanced each other perfectly. Both boys had loved Mary Catherine Sullivan, though neither had spoken of it to the other. It was an understanding that had grown between them like a shadow, acknowledged but never examined too closely. She was the kind of woman who could make a man want to be better than he was. And both Cole and Ellis had felt that pull. Cole's father, William Mercer, had been a good man, or so Cole had believed for most of his life. He ran an honest spread, paid his debts and raised his son to respect hard work and fair dealing. He taught Cole to read the weather and the land, to judge a horse's character and a man's intentions. Most importantly, he taught him that a man's word was his bond, and that honor mattered more than money. The night William Mercer died changed everything Cole thought he knew about the world. It had been a cold November evening in 1872. Cole had been in town courting Mary Catherine, walking her home from the church social, where she'd been helping serve apple cider and molasses cookies to raise money for new school books. They'd been talking about the future, tentatively, the way young people do when they're not quite sure they have the right to dream so big. Mary Catherine had mentioned that her teaching contract would be up for renewal in the spring, and maybe, if she could find someone steady and reliable, she might consider staying in Copper Creek permanently. Cole had been working up the courage to ask her properly, to make his intentions known in a way that mattered when they heard the gunshots. 3 sharp cracks that echoed off the buildings and sent the horses in the livery stable into nervous whinnying. Cole had kissed Mary Catherine's cheek quickly, told her to get inside, and run toward the sound, with his heart hammering against his ribs. He'd found his father lying in the dirt behind Hutchinson's general store, blood spreading dark across his shirt front. William Mercer had been conscious still, but barely, his breath coming in short gasps as Cole knelt beside him. "Son," his father had whispered, gripping Cole's hand with surprising strength. "I'm sorry. I'm so damned sorry." Those were the last words William Mercer ever spoke. He died there in his son's arms, while half the town gathered around, their faces grave in the lamplight spilling from the store windows. By the time Sheriff Patterson arrived, Cole was covered in his father's blood and wild with grief. The money was found the next morning, nearly $3,000 hidden in William Mercer's saddlebags. More cash money than an honest rancher should have had. Banknotes from the Territorial Bank in Tucson, the same bank that had been robbed 2 weeks earlier. The same bank robbery where a guard had been killed. Cole had tried to explain that his father couldn't have been involved, that William Mercer had never stolen so much as a penny in his life. But the evidence was damning, and when Jack Morrison stepped forward to swear he'd seen William Mercer with the robbers, Cole's world crumbled completely. Morrison was a drifter who'd been hanging around Copper Creek for a few weeks, picking up odd jobs and keeping to himself. He was a hard-looking man, with cold eyes and a scar running from his left ear to the corner of his mouth. But he spoke well and claimed to be a former cavalry officer looking for a fresh start. When he testified that he'd witnessed William Mercer meeting with known outlaws on the night of the bank robbery, even Ellis's father, who served as deputy, had to admit the case looked solid. Cole had been arrested the next day. Young, angry and desperate to clear his father's name, he'd done exactly the wrong thing. He'd fought back. During the struggle with Deputy Caldwell and Sheriff Patterson, Cole had managed to grab a gun and, in the chaos, accidentally shot Deputy Caldwell in the shoulder. That single moment had transformed Cole from a grieving son into a wanted fugitive. Ellis had been there that day, watching from across the street as his father clutched his wounded shoulder and Cole fled on horseback into the desert. Cole had seen the look on his best friend's face, confusion, betrayal, and something that might have been pity. It was a look that had haunted Cole for 23 years. Now, as Socorro picked her way down the rocky trail with Boone trotting alongside, Cole wondered if Ellis ever thought about those days in Copper Creek. Did he remember the fishing trips to Willow Creek, where they'd spent entire afternoons talking about their dreams? Did he remember the way they'd practiced their quick draw behind the barn, competing to see who could clear leather faster? Did he remember Mary Catherine at all? Or had 23 years of being a lawman erased the memory of the schoolteacher who'd made both boys believe in something better than themselves? Cole had heard through the desert grapevine that Ellis had indeed become a sheriff, working various towns throughout the territory. He'd never married, which struck Cole as strange, given Ellis's steady nature and good character. Any woman would have been lucky to have him. Cole had also heard that Ellis was honest, fair, and respected, Everything a good lawman should be. They'd crossed paths a few times over the years, always briefly, and always with Cole as the pursued and Ellis as the pursuer. But Ellis had never seemed to put his full effort into the chase, and Cole had always managed to slip away. At first, Cole had attributed it to luck or superior knowledge of the terrain. Later, he'd begun to wonder if Ellis was letting him go deliberately. The thought both comforted and troubled him. If Ellis believed in his innocence, why hadn't he done something about it? If Ellis knew Cole wasn't guilty of his father's crimes, why had he spent 23 years wearing a badge while Cole lived like a hunted animal? Boone suddenly stopped, his ears pricked forward and his nose testing the wind. The dog's behavior made Cole rein in Socorro and listen carefully. In the distance, barely audible above the desert breeze, came the sound of running water. It was unusual for this time of year, when the seasonal creeks should have been bone dry. "What do you think, old boy?" Cole asked, and Boone's tail gave a single wag. Before the dog set off toward the sound, they crested a small rise and saw the bridge below them, an old stone structure that had been built to carry the stagecoach road over what was usually a dry wash. Now, late monsoon rains had put enough water in the channel to create a small stream, and the sound of it babbling over the rocks had carried farther than expected. It was a peaceful scene, the kind that made a man grateful to be alive on such a fine evening. The setting sun turned the stone bridge golden, and somewhere a mockingbird was running through its repertoire of borrowed songs. Cole was about to nudge Socorro forward when Boone began to whine, a low, troubled sound that meant something was wrong. That's when Cole heard it, a human groan echoing from beneath the bridge's arch. He dismounted quickly, his hand instinctively moving to his gun as he approached the edge of the wash. Boone had already scrambled down the rocky bank and was standing near the bridge's foundation, looking back at Cole with urgent eyes. Cole climbed down carefully, his boots slipping on the loose stones. The smell hit him before he saw the source, blood and quite a lot of it. Someone was hurt badly down here. He rounded the bridge's stone support and stopped dead. A man lay propped against the weathered rock, his shirt dark with blood and his breathing shallow. He was maybe Cole's age, with graying hair and a face that had been handsome once, before hard living, and worry lines had carved their marks. A sheriff's badge was pinned to his vest, the metal dented and torn as if it had stopped. Oh, bullet! Cole's heart began to hammer as recognition dawned. Ellis Caldwell looked up at him with eyes that had lost none of their intelligence, despite the pain clouding them. For a long moment neither man spoke. 23 years collapsed into this single, impossible instant, the outlaw and the lawman, the former best friends, meeting again in the shadow of an old bridge, while time ran out like water through their fingers. "Hello? Oh, Cole," Ellis said quietly, his voice rough with pain, but still carrying the gentle tone Cole remembered. "I was wondering when you'd find me." Cole's hand remained frozen on his gun grip as the weight of 23 years pressed down on him like a physical force. Ellis Caldwell, the boy who'd taught him to tie a proper lasso, the young man who'd stood beside him at church socials, the friend who'd become his pursuer, lay bleeding against the stone foundation of a forgotten bridge. Ellis. The name came out rougher than Cole intended. "What happened here?" Ellis tried to shift position and winced, his face going pale beneath his weathered tan. "Same thing that's been happening for too long, I reckon. Men with more greed than sense." He gestured weakly toward his side, where blood had soaked through his shirt and vest. "Took two in the gut. Been here since yesterday morning, best I can figure." Boone approached cautiously, his tail low but not tucked, the dog's way of showing respect for a wounded creature. Ellis extended a shaking hand, and to Cole's surprise, Boone allowed the touch. The dog had always been particular about strangers. "Smart animal," Ellis murmured, running his fingers through Boone's coat. "Knows when a man's done fighting." Cole found himself moving closer, despite every instinct screaming at him to mount Socorro and ride hard for the border. This could be a trap. Ellis might have deputies positioned nearby. After 23 years of running, caution had become as natural as breathing, but as Cole knelt beside his childhood friend, He saw no deception in those familiar brown eyes, only pain, exhaustion, and something that looked like relief. "Who shot you?" Cole asked, his voice softer now. "Jack Morrison and his boys." Ellis's mouth twisted into a bitter smile. Funny how some names just keep coming back to haunt a man. The words hit Cole like a physical blow. Morrison, the drifter who'd testified against his father, who'd pointed the finger that destroyed the Mercer name and sent Cole fleeing into the desert. Cole had assumed the man was long dead or moved on to easier pickings. Morrison's still alive? Cole's hand tightened unconsciously on his gun, very much so. Running a gang now, calling himself Captain Morrison like he's still cavalry. Ellis coughed and flecks of blood appeared on his lips. Been tracking them for 3 months. They hit the bank in Silver City, killed 2 people. Good people. Cole pulled out his canteen and offered it to Ellis, who took a grateful sip before continuing. "I got close. Too close, I reckon. Caught up with them at their camp about 10 miles north of here. Morrison recognized me from the old days." Ellis's eyes found Cole's, started talking about Copper Creek, about your father, about you. The desert wind whistled through the bridge supports, and Cole felt a chill that had nothing to do with the approaching evening. "What did he say?" Ellis was quiet for so long that Cole thought he might have lost consciousness. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, Ellis spoke words that shattered everything Cole thought he knew about his past. "He said your father never robbed that bank." "Cole said he planted that money in your father's saddlebags after he killed him." The world tilted sideways. Cole felt as if the ground beneath him had suddenly turned to quicksand. "What?" "Morrison killed your father because William had figured out what Morrison was really doing in Copper Creek. Your father caught him casing the bank, realized Morrison was planning a robbery. When William threatened to turn him in, Morrison shot him." Ellis's breathing was growing more labored, but he pressed on. "Morrison needed a scapegoat, someone to take the blame. Your father was convenient." Cole's mind reeled. 23 years of guilt, shame, and exile, all based on a lie. His father had died because he'd tried to do the right thing, not because he'd betrayed his principles. William Mercer had been exactly the man Cole had believed him to be before that terrible night changed everything. "Why didn't you—" Cole's voice caught. "Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you stop it?" Ellis closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, they were bright with unshed tears. "Because I was 18 years old and scared out of my mind. Morrison threatened my family, threatened Mary Catherine. Said if I opened my mouth, he'd come back and finish what he started." Ellis's voice dropped to a whisper. "I was a coward, Cole. I let you run because I was too afraid to stand up for the truth." The admission hung between them like a physical presence. Cole felt a strange mix of emotions, rage at the injustice, relief at finally knowing the truth, and something approaching forgiveness for the frightened boy Ellis had been. "There's more," Ellis continued, his voice growing weaker. "Mary Catherine knew, not about Morrison being the real killer, but she knew your father was innocent. She never believed the robbery story, not for a minute." Cole's heart clenched. "What are you saying?" "She waited for you, Cole. Waited for 3 years before she finally accepted that you weren't coming back. Even then, she never married for love. She married Thomas Murphy because he was kind and because she was tired of being alone." Ellis coughed again, more blood this time. "But she never stopped believing in you." The words cut deeper than any bullet could have. Cole had spent 23 years convincing himself that Mary Catherine was better off without him, that she'd moved on and found happiness with someone else. To learn that she'd waited, that she'd believed in his innocence when he'd stopped believing in it himself, was almost unbearable. "Where is she now?" Cole asked. "Widowed. Thomas died 5 years back. She's still in Copper Creek, still teaching." "Still," Ellis's voice failed him for a moment. "Still hoping you'll come home someday." Boone whined softly and pressed closer to Ellis, as if sensing the man's growing weakness. Cole reached out automatically to comfort his dog and found his hand touching Ellis's shoulder instead. "Morrison has to be stopped," Ellis said with sudden urgency. "He's killed too many people, destroyed too many lives. He's got 5 men with him now, all cut from the same cloth. They're planning something big, a bank job in Tucson. Enough money to disappear into Mexico and live like kings. Cole felt the familiar weight of decision pressing down on him. For 23 years, he'd run from confrontation, choosing survival over justice. He'd told himself it was the smart play, the safe play. But sitting here beside his dying friend, listening to the truth about his father's death, Cole realized he was tired of running. "How long do we have?" he asked. Ellis managed a weak smile. "We? You're not dying under this bridge, Ellis. Not if I can help it." "Cole, you need to understand something." Ellis reached into his vest pocket with trembling fingers and pulled out a folded paper. "This is a letter Morrison wrote, confessing to your father's murder. He was drunk one night, feeling guilty, I think. Wrote it all down, every detail." Cole took the paper with hands that weren't quite steady. The bloodstains on it were still fresh, Ellis's blood, mixed with 23 years of buried truth. "Morrison came looking for this after he shot me. Tore my camp apart trying to find it. When he couldn't, he left me for dead." Ellis's breathing was becoming more ragged. "He doesn't know I hid it first." Cole unfolded the letter carefully. The handwriting was crude but clear, and Morrison's confession was complete. How he'd killed William Mercer, planted the money, and threatened Ellis into silence. It was enough to clear the Mercer name and put Morrison on the wrong end of a noose. "Why now?" Cole asked. "Why are you telling me this now?" Ellis was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the darkening sky above the bridge. "Because I'm dying, and because I'm tired of carrying the weight of what I should have done 23 years ago." He looked at Cole directly. "Because you deserve to know who your father really was. And because Mary Catherine deserves to know you're not the man they painted you to be." The sound of horses approached from the distance, multiple riders moving at a steady pace. Cole tensed, his hand moving instinctively to his gun, but Ellis shook his head weakly. "Morrison's boys," Ellis whispered. "They're coming back to make sure I'm dead. And if they find you here, then they'll find more than they bargained for," Cole said grimly. For the first time since he'd found Ellis under the bridge, Cole Mercer wasn't thinking about running. He was thinking about standing his ground and finally settling a debt that was 23 years overdue. The hoofbeats grew louder, echoing off the canyon walls like distant thunder. Cole counted at least 4 horses, maybe 5, moving with the confident pace of men who believed they owned the territory they rode through. He helped Ellis shift deeper into the shadows beneath the bridge, both men wincing as the movement sent fresh blood seeping through the sheriff's shirt. "How bad is it, really?" Cole asked. Examining the wounds as best he could in the fading light, Ellis managed a weak laugh. "Bad enough that I won't be seeing Christmas, I'd say. But maybe good enough that I can help you finish what we should have started 23 years ago." Cole pulled his father's pocket watch from his vest, a silver timepiece that had stopped working the night. "William Mercer died, its hands frozen at 11:47. He'd carried it all these years as a reminder of that moment when his life changed forever. Now, holding Morrison's confession in one hand and the stopped watch in the other, Cole felt the weight of time itself. "Tell me about that night," Cole said quietly. "Tell me what really happened after I ran." Ellis closed his eyes, his breathing shallow but steady. "Your father was meeting someone behind Hutchinson's store. I thought it was strange. William wasn't the type for secret meetings. But Morrison had been asking questions around town, subtle-like. Questions about the bank's schedule, about who carried the deposit money to Tucson. The horses were closer now, close enough that Cole could hear voices carried on the desert wind. He signaled for Boone to stay quiet, and the dog settled beside Ellis as if he understood the gravity of their situation. "Morrison had been watching your father for weeks," Ellis continued. "William must have gotten suspicious, started asking his own questions. That night, Morrison lured him out with some story about wanting to buy cattle. When your father showed up, Morrison was waiting with a gun." Cole felt his jaw tighten. "And the money?" "Morrison had hit a silver mine payroll earlier that week. Small job, but enough to make it look like your father had been involved in something bigger. He planted it all in William's saddlebags while we were gathered around the body." Ellis opened his eyes, meeting Cole's gaze. "I saw him do it, Cole. I was young and stupid, but I wasn't blind. The confession hit Cole like a physical blow. For 23 years, he'd carried the shame of believing his father capable of robbery and murder. To learn that William Mercer had died trying to protect their community from a predator made the loss feel fresh and raw all over again. Morrison threatened Mary Catherine specifically, Ellis said, his voice growing stronger with urgency as the riders approached. Said he'd come back for her if anyone tried to connect him to your father's death. Said he'd make it look like an Indian raid, leave no witnesses. Cole understood now why the 18-year-old Ellis had stayed silent. Protecting the woman they both loved had been more important than clearing Cole's name. It was a choice Cole might have made himself, given the same circumstances and the same fear. The sound of horses stopped abruptly, somewhere above them on the main trail. Cole heard voices now, rough, hard voices that carried the casual cruelty of men who'd forgotten what it meant to feel compassion. "Sheriff's horse is gone," one voice said. "Tracks lead down toward the bridge. Told you that bastard wasn't dead yet," another replied. "Morrison's gonna want to see the body this time." Cole drew his Colt .45 quietly, checking the cylinder out of habit. 6 rounds, and he had a spare loaded cylinder in his belt. Against 5 men it might not be enough, but it would have to do. Beside him, Ellis was fumbling weakly for his own gun. "Save your strength," Cole whispered. "I'll handle this." "Like hell," Ellis replied, though his voice was barely audible. "I've been running from this fight for 23 years. I'm not running anymore." The riders were dismounting now, their boots crunching on the rocky ground above. Cole could hear them spreading out, probably flanking the bridge from both sides. These weren't casual drifters. They moved with military precision, the kind Morrison would have learned during his cavalry days. "Tell me about Mary Catherine," Cole said quietly, needing to hear something good before the violence began. "Tell me she found some happiness." Ellis smiled, and for a moment he looked like the young man Cole remembered. "She never stopped reading poetry. Still quotes Longfellow when she thinks no one's listening. Still puts wildflowers on your father's grave every Sunday after church." The words created a vivid picture in Cole's mind. Mary Catherine, older now, but still graceful, still carrying that gentle strength that had made her seem like an angel to 2 young cowboys. The thought of her tending his father's grave, keeping William Mercer's memory alive when his own son had been too ashamed to return, brought tears to Cole's eyes. "She knows you're innocent," Ellis whispered. "She's always known." A shadow fell across the entrance to their hiding place as one of Morrison's men appeared at the edge of the wash. Cole held his breath, hoping the gathering darkness would conceal them, but the man was thorough in his search. Found them. The outlaw called to his companions. "Sheriff's still breathing and he's got company." Cole rose from his crouch in one fluid movement, his gun already aimed and firing. The first shot took the searcher in the chest, spinning him backward into the rocky wall of the wash. The man's rifle clattered down the slope as his companions opened fire from above. "Stay down!" Cole shouted to Ellis, though the sheriff was already trying to position himself to return fire despite his wounds. Bullets whined off the stone bridge supports, sending chips of rock flying. Cole pressed himself against the foundation, using the massive stonework as cover while he tried to count muzzle flashes. 4 men above, positioned at different points around the bridge. They had the high ground and better angles, but Cole had something they didn't: intimate knowledge of this terrain, from years of using forgotten places as shelter. Cole Mercer. A voice called from above, older, more refined than the others. Morrison himself. "Been a long time, boy?" Cole didn't reply, instead focusing on the tactical situation. The outlaws would try to pin him down, while 1 or 2 worked their way around to flank his position. Standard cavalry tactics, probably ingrained in Morrison from his army days. "Your daddy died squealing like a pig." Morrison continued, his voice carrying clearly in the still air. "Begged me not to kill him. Said he had a son to think about." The words were meant to provoke Cole into making a mistake, and they nearly worked. Only Ellis's steadying hand on his shoulder kept Cole from charging up the slope in a blind rage. "Don't let him get to you," Ellis whispered. "That's what he wants." Cole nodded, forcing himself to think tactically. Morrison was using psychological warfare, trying to cloud Cole's judgment with anger and grief. It was an old trick, and one Cole had fallen for once before when he'd fled Copper Creek instead of staying to fight for the truth. This time would be different. This time, Cole Mercer wasn't running from anything. The wanted poster had been Ellis's burden for years, a weathered piece of paper bearing Cole's younger face and the lie that had destroyed both their lives. Ellis had carried it in his vest pocket through countless towns and endless miles, not as a tool for capturing his quarry, but as a reminder of his own cowardice. Now crumpled and stained with his blood, it lay between them like an accusation. "I could have torn that up years ago," Ellis whispered, nodding toward the poster. "Should have. But I kept telling myself I'd find a way to make it right, find a way to clear your name without putting Mary Catherine in danger." Above them, Morrison's men were moving with practiced efficiency. Cole could hear boots scraping on stone as at least two of them worked their way down the sides of the wash, using the growing darkness as cover. They'd be in position to flank his hiding spot within minutes. "How many times did you track me?" Cole asked, checking his ammunition while keeping watch for movement above. 12, Ellis replied without hesitation. 12 times I got close enough to take you in, and 12 times I let you slip away. Told myself it was bad luck, or that you were just too smart for me. Cole remembered those encounters differently, times when he'd felt eyes on him, when his instincts had screamed danger, only to find Ellis somewhere nearby. He'd always assumed Ellis was simply doing his job, pursuing a wanted man with professional dedication. To learn that Ellis had been protecting him all along created a complex mix of gratitude and regret. "Morrison knows," Ellis continued, his voice growing urgent. "He figured out years ago that I was letting you go. Started asking questions, making threats. That's why he came after me, not just for the confession letter, but because he knew I was the weak link in his story." A rifle barrel appeared at the edge of their hiding place, and Cole put a bullet through the stone just above it. The shooter jerked back with a curse, but Cole knew it was only a temporary reprieve. They were running out of time and options. "Tell me about Mary Catherine's husband," Cole said, needing to understand everything before the shooting started in earnest. Ellis managed a sad smile. "Thomas Murphy. Good man, patient man. Loved her completely, even though he knew she'd never love him the same way. He died trying to prove your innocence, Cole. Spent his own money hiring investigators, following leads. Got too close to the truth about Morrison." The words hit Cole like a physical blow. Another good man dead because of lies and cowardice. Another life destroyed by Morrison's web of deception. How many people had suffered because Cole had run instead of staying to fight for the truth? "Morrison had him killed," Ellis confirmed. "Made it look like a riding accident, but Thomas was too good a horseman for that. Found his body at the bottom of Devil's Canyon with his neck broken." Ellis coughed, more blood appearing on his lips. "Mary Catherine knew what really happened, but she couldn't prove it any more than we could." Boone suddenly lifted his head, his ears pricked toward the opposite end of their hiding place. The dog's warning came just in time. Cole spun and fired as an outlaw appeared around the corner of the bridge foundation. The man dropped his rifle and clutched his shoulder, stumbling backward with a string of curses. "That's 2 down," Cole muttered, though he knew wounded men could still fight. "Morrison's got 3 left," Ellis said, struggling to sit up straighter against the stone wall, plus himself. "All of them killers, all of them with nothing to lose." From above, Morrison's voice carried down with mocking laughter. "You're trapped down there, Mercer. No way out this time. Why don't you come up here and face me like a man instead of hiding like the yellow dog your daddy was?" Cole's finger tightened on his trigger, but Ellis caught his wrist. "Don't let him bait you. That's how he wins. He killed my father," Cole said through gritted teeth. "He killed Thomas Murphy. He's destroyed everything good in my life, and if you charge up there angry and stupid, he'll kill you too." "Then what happens to Mary Catherine? What happens to the truth?" Ellis's grip was weak but insistent. "Use your head, Cole. Fight smart." Above them, the outlaws were repositioning again. Cole could hear them communicating in low voices, coordinating their next assault. They had all the advantages: numbers, position, time. But they also had something Cole could exploit: arrogance. Morrison believed he'd already won, believed Cole was just another cornered animal waiting to be put down. "There's something else," Ellis said quietly. "Something Morrison doesn't know you have." "What's that?" Ellis reached into his boot and pulled out a small derringer, the kind gamblers favored for close work. "Thomas Murphy's gun, the one he was carrying when Morrison had him killed. Mary Catherine gave it to me, asked me to make sure justice was done." Cole took the small weapon, feeling its weight. 2 shots, probably .41 caliber. Not much firepower, but sometimes a hidden ace was worth more than a full house. "She wanted you to have it," Ellis said. Said if anyone was going to settle Thomas's account, it should be the man Thomas died trying to help. The gesture meant more to Cole than Ellis could know. Mary Catherine had kept faith not just in Cole's innocence, but in his eventual return to set things right. Through all the years of silence and separation, she'd held on to hope that justice would prevail. "There's a way out of this," Cole said, studying the terrain around them. "But it means leaving you here alone." "No." Ellis's voice was firm despite his weakness. "We do this together, or we don't do it at all. I've been running from this fight for 23 years. "I'm not running anymore," Cole nodded, understanding. Some debts could only be paid in full, and some stands had to be made regardless of the cost. Ellis was dying anyway. Better to die fighting for the truth than bleeding out in the shadows like a wounded animal. "Morrison!" Cole called up to the bridge. "You want me? Come down here and get me. Unless you're too yellow to face a man without your boys backing you up." The response was immediate, a volley of gunfire that sent stone chips flying around their hiding place. But Cole had accomplished what he'd intended. He'd provoked Morrison into revealing his exact position. The outlaw leader was directly above them, probably leaning over the bridge railing to get a better angle. "Boone," Cole whispered to his dog. "Go find the horses." "Go on, boy." The dog looked at him with intelligent eyes, seeming to understand that his master was asking him to leave. Boone whined softly but obeyed, slipping away into the growing darkness toward where Socorro and the other horses waited. "Smart," Ellis approved. "No point in getting him killed for our mistakes." Cole checked his weapons one final time, 6 rounds in his Colt, a spare cylinder ready, and Thomas Murphy's derringer tucked into his boot. "Against 4 men it might not be enough, but it would have to do. When this is over," Cole said, "what do I tell Mary Catherine?" Ellis was quiet for a long moment, his breathing labored. "Tell her I'm sorry. Tell her I should have been braver 23 years ago. And tell her," his voice caught, "tell her I loved her, always loved her, even though I never had the right to say so." The confession hung between them, like a bridge across years of regret. Cole had always suspected Ellis's feelings for Mary Catherine ran deeper than friendship. But hearing it spoken aloud gave weight to all the choices his friend had made. "I'll tell her," Cole promised. Above them, Morrison was growing impatient. "Time's up, Mercer. Come out now, or we'll come down there and drag you out." Cole rose from his crouch, his decision made. He would not die hiding under a bridge like a frightened animal. If this was his last stand, it would be worthy of his father's memory and the woman who'd never stopped believing in him. "Ellis," he said quietly, "when I move, you put everything you've got into that shot. Make it count." Ellis nodded, raising his gun with trembling hands but steady resolve. "See you on the other side, partner." Cole stepped out from behind the stone support, his gun already firing as he moved into the open. Mary Catherine's wedding ring had been simple, a plain gold band that reflected her practical nature and Thomas Murphy's modest means. Ellis had carried it for 5 years now, ever since the day she'd pressed it into his hands at Thomas's funeral. Her eyes dry but her voice breaking as she'd whispered, "He would have wanted you to have this. He knew what you sacrificed for all of us." The ring was in Ellis's vest pocket now, warm against his chest as he steadied his gun with both hands. His vision was blurring from blood loss, but his resolve had never been clearer. This was his chance to finally do what he should have done as an 18-year-old boy, stand up for the truth. Regardless of the consequences, Cole's first shot took down the outlaw positioned on the left side of the bridge. the man's scream echoing off the canyon walls as he tumbled into the wash. Ellis managed to wing another with a shot that sent the man scrambling for better cover, clutching a wounded arm. 2 down, 3 to go, but Morrison and his remaining men were seasoned fighters. They adapted quickly, using the bridge's stone railings for protection while maintaining overlapping fields of fire. Cole found himself pinned down again, this time in the open with limited cover. "You always were too quick to anger, boy," Morrison called down, his voice carrying the satisfaction of a predator who'd cornered his prey. "Just like that night your daddy died squealing." Cole forced himself not to respond, instead focusing on the tactical situation. He'd managed to reduce the odds, but he was still outnumbered and outgunned. Worse, Ellis was fading fast. The sheriff's shots were becoming increasingly erratic as his strength ebbed. A memory surfaced from their childhood. Cole and Ellis, maybe 12 years old, trapped in the barn loft by Ellis's older brother and his friends during a game of hide-and-seek. They'd been outnumbered then too, but Ellis had come up with a plan. "Sometimes," young Ellis had whispered, "you have to make them think they've won before you can really win. The same principle might work now." "Morrison," Cole called up, putting just the right note of desperation in his voice. "I'm hit! Legs busted! I can't run anymore." He let his voice crack slightly, selling the performance. Beside him, Ellis caught on immediately and added his own touch, a convincing groan of pain that wasn't entirely feigned. "About time," Morrison laughed. "Come on up here, boy. Let's finish this face-to-face." "Can't make it up the slope," Cole replied, injecting defeat into his tone. "Too steep. Come down here if you want me." There was a long pause as Morrison considered. Cole knew the outlaw was weighing the risks. It could be a trap, but it could also be the wounded desperation of a cornered man. Finally, Morrison's ego won out over his caution. "Boys, cover me," Morrison ordered. "I'm going down to collect my prize." Cole heard boots on stone as Morrison began his descent into the wash. This was their chance, maybe their only chance. If Morrison came down alone, the odds shifted dramatically in Cole's favor. But Morrison was too smart to make it that easy. He came down slowly, his gun drawn and ready, using every bit of available cover. When he finally appeared at the mouth of their hiding place, he had his Colt trained on Cole's chest and a smile that held no warmth whatsoever. "Jack Morrison," Cole said quietly, finally face to face with the man who'd destroyed his life. Morrison was older now, his hair gone gray and his face marked by years of violence, but the cold eyes were exactly as Cole remembered them. "Cole Mercer," Morrison replied. "You've led me quite a chase over the years. But it ends here." "Yeah," Cole agreed. "It does." For a moment the two men simply stared at each other across 23 years of hate and deception. Morrison looked exactly like what he was. A killer who'd grown comfortable with violence, who'd learned to enjoy the power that came with taking lives. There was no remorse in those pale eyes, no hint of conscience or regret. "Your daddy was a fool," Morrison said conversationally. "Could have lived if he'd minded his own business. Could have raised his son instead of bleeding out in the dirt behind a general store. My father was twice the man you'll ever be," Cole replied evenly. Morrison laughed. "Your father was a dead man the moment he stuck his nose where it didn't belong. Just like you're a dead man now." He glanced at Ellis, who was barely conscious. "Just like your friend here." "Ellis isn't my friend," Cole said, the lie coming easily. "He's the lawman who's been hunting me for 23 years. Kill him or don't. Makes no difference to me." The words seemed to surprise Morrison, who studied Cole's face for signs of deception. It was exactly the opening Cole had been waiting for. That moment of uncertainty when an enemy's attention wavered. Ellis's eyes fluttered open, and despite his weakness, he managed to mouth 2 words. "Do it." Cole drew Thomas Murphy's Derringer in one smooth motion, the small gun appearing in his hand like magic. Morrison's eyes widened in shock. He'd been watching Cole's holstered Colt, not expecting a hidden weapon. The Derringer's first shot took Morrison in the chest, spinning him sideways. The outlaw's own gun discharged harmlessly into the ground as he staggered, his face showing disbelief that he'd been outmaneuvered by a dying sheriff and a cornered fugitive. "That's for my father," Cole said quietly. Morrison tried to raise his gun again, blood spreading across his shirt front. His movements were sluggish now, the shock of the wound stealing his coordination. Cole could have finished him with the Derringer's second shot, but something held him back. "And that's for Thomas Murphy," Ellis whispered, somehow finding the strength to put his final bullet exactly where it needed to go. Morrison dropped like a felled tree, his gun clattering across the rocky ground. Above them, his remaining men shouted in alarm, realizing their leader was down. But without Morrison's leadership, they were just common criminals facing a man who'd spent 23 years learning how to survive against impossible odds. "Can you climb?" Cole asked Ellis, who was barely conscious. "Not a chance," Ellis replied with a weak smile. "But I can still shoot if you prop me upright." Cole positioned Ellis against the stone wall where he'd have a clear field of fire toward the bridge. The sheriff's breathing was labored, but his eyes were clear and determined. "Mary Catherine's ring," Ellis whispered, pressing the gold band into Cole's hand. "Give it back to her. Tell her Thomas's death has been avenged." Cole pocketed the ring, feeling its weight like a promise. Above them, Morrison's surviving men were arguing among themselves, their voices carrying clearly in the still air. Without their leader, they were lost. Dangerous still, but no longer the coordinated threat they'd been minutes before. "Time to finish this," Cole said, checking his ammunition one final time. The child's wooden toy horse was weathered smooth by countless small hands. Its paint faded, but its craftsmanship still evident. Ellis had carried it for 3 years now, ever since Mary Catherine's son David had died of fever at age 6. The boy had dropped it while playing near the schoolhouse, and Ellis had picked it up, meaning to return it. But by the time he'd worked up the courage to approach Mary Catherine's home, the child was already gone, another victim of the harsh realities that claimed too many young lives on the frontier. Ellis pulled the toy from his vest pocket now, his hands trembling as he placed it carefully on the ground beside him. It represented everything he'd lost. The family he'd never had, the son he'd never raised, the life he might have lived if he'd been braver 23 years ago. "Whose was that?" Cole asked, recognizing the pain in his friend's eyes. "Mary Catherine's boy," Ellis whispered. "David, he died 3 years after Thomas. Fever took him in 2 days. Nothing anyone could do." Ellis's voice broke slightly. "I used to watch him play in the schoolyard. He had his mother's laugh and his father's gentle way with animals." The revelation hit Cole like a physical blow. Mary Catherine had lost not just her husband, but her child as well. She'd buried the family she'd built in Thomas's absence, left alone with nothing but memories and the hope that someday justice might prevail. "Morrison's men are getting nervous up there," Cole observed, listening to the increasingly agitated voices above. "Without their leader, they're not sure what to do." "Good men gone bad," Ellis said, his breathing increasingly labored. "That's all any of them ever were." Morrison knew how to find the weakness in a man's character and exploit it. Promise enough money, and most men will convince themselves that wrong is right. Cole checked his ammunition again. 3 rounds left in his current cylinder, plus the spare. Against 3 men, it would have to be enough. But these weren't the disciplined fighters they'd been under Morrison's leadership. They were scared, leaderless, and starting to panic. "I need to tell you something," Ellis said urgently. "About Mary Catherine. About why she really waited so long before marrying Thomas. Ellis, save your strength." "No, you need to hear this." Ellis gripped Cole's arm with surprising strength. "She was pregnant, Cole. When you left Copper Creek, she was carrying your child." The words hit Cole like a lightning strike. Everything he thought he knew about his past shifted again, revealing new layers of loss and regret. "What happened?" "She lost the baby 2 months after you disappeared. The stress, the grief, it was too much." Ellis's voice was barely audible now. "She never told anyone whose child it was, but I knew. I could see it in her eyes every time someone mentioned your name." Cole felt the world tilting around him. He'd left behind not just the woman he loved, but his unborn child as well. The weight of what he'd lost, what they'd all lost, threatened to crush him completely. She blamed herself, Ellis continued. Thought if she'd been stronger, if she'd believed in you more openly, maybe you wouldn't have run. Maybe you would have stayed and fought for the truth. I couldn't stay, Cole said, his voice rough with emotion. Morrison threatened everyone I cared about. If I'd stayed, more people would have died. I know. We all know that now. But Mary Catherine carried that guilt for years, until Thomas finally convinced her that you'd left because you loved her too much to put her in danger. Above them, Cole could hear the outlaws moving around, probably trying to decide whether to cut their losses and run or come down to verify Morrison's death. Their indecision was an advantage, but it wouldn't last long. There's something else, Ellis said, pulling a folded piece of paper from his shirt pocket. Mary Catherine wrote you a letter right after you left. Never sent it, but she gave it to me years later. Asked me to give it to you if I ever got the chance. Cole took the letter with hands that weren't quite steady. The paper was yellowed with age, the ink faded but still legible. He could see Mary Catherine's careful handwriting, the same script he remembered from the notes she'd left in his school books when they were young. Read it later, Ellis advised. When you're safe. When you can give it the attention it deserves. Cole folded the letter carefully and tucked it inside his vest, next to his father's stopped watch. 23 years of separation, and Mary Catherine's words were finally coming home. Cole, one of the outlaws, called down from the bridge. Morrison's dead, ain't he? We can hear it in your voice. Cole didn't answer, instead motioning for Ellis to stay quiet. Let them wonder. Let their fear and uncertainty eat away at their resolve. We're riding out, another voice shouted. This ain't worth dying for. Like hell, the first man replied. Morrison promised us $50,000 for that Tucson job. I ain't walking away from that kind of money. $50,000 won't do you any good if you're dead. Neither will being broke for the rest of your life. Cole listened to them argue, recognizing the signs of a group falling apart under pressure. Morrison had held them together through fear and the promise of easy money. Without him, they were just three scared men trying to decide whether greed was worth the risk of death. They're breaking up, Cole whispered to Ellis. One of them wants to run. The others want to finish the job, which means they'll make mistakes, Ellis replied, though his voice was growing weaker. Desperate men always do, Ellis, Cole said quietly. If I don't make it out of this, you will. Ellis's voice carried absolute conviction. You'll make it out and you'll go home to Mary Catherine. You'll tell her the truth about everything, about your father, about Morrison, about all of us. And maybe, if there's any justice left in this world, you'll find some happiness together. Cole wanted to protest, to say that too much time had passed, that too much damage had been done. But looking at Ellis, dying for the truth he should have spoken years ago, Cole realized that it was never too late to do the right thing. Above them, the argument ended with the sound of horses riding away. 2 horses, by Cole's count. That left one man on the bridge, probably the greediest or the most desperate of Morrison's followers. Just one left, Cole said. Ellis managed a weak smile. I like those odds better. Cole checked his weapons one final time and prepared to finish what had started 23 years ago in the dirt behind Hutchinson's general store. The real murder weapon lay beside Morrison's body, Cole's father's own Colt, .44, its distinctive bone grip and silver inlay unmistakable even in the fading light. Morrison had kept it as a trophy all these years. The gun that had actually killed William Mercer on that terrible night in 1872. But as Cole knelt to examine the weapon, Ellis's weakening voice delivered a truth that shattered everything Cole had believed about his father's death. Cole, Ellis whispered, blood flecking his lips. There's something else. Something I should have told you years ago. Save your strength, Cole replied. But Ellis gripped his arm with surprising urgency. Your father wasn't the innocent man you think he was. The words hit Cole like ice water. What do you mean? Ellis struggled to sit up straighter. His breathing labored, but his eyes clear with the desperate need to finally tell the complete truth. William was working with Morrison's gang, Cole. not as a leader, not as a planner, but as someone who provided information about bank schedules, payroll movements. Small things at first. Cole felt the ground shifting beneath him again. "That's impossible." "My father was an honest man. He was a desperate man," Ellis corrected gently. "The ranch was failing. You know that. You saw the bills piling up, heard the arguments between your parents before your mother died. William was drowning in debt, and Morrison offered him a way out." The revelation struck Cole like lightning. He remembered those last months before his mother's death, the hushed conversations that stopped when he entered a room, the worry lines that had carved themselves deeper into his father's face with each passing week. He'd attributed it all to grief over his mother's illness, but now he wondered if there had been something darker eating away at William Mercer's conscience. Morrison recruited him slowly, Ellis continued, his voice growing weaker. "Small favors at first. When was the bank expecting deposits? Which ranchers carried cash to town? That sort of thing. Your father probably told himself he wasn't really hurting anyone, but he was." Cole's voice was flat with growing understanding. 3 people died in robberies that William helped plan, even if he never pulled a trigger himself. The bank guard in Tucson, a rancher near Willow Springs, a drummer carrying payroll money. Ellis coughed, bringing up more blood. "Morrison kept pushing for bigger scores, and your father kept giving him information because he was in too deep to stop." Cole picked up his father's gun, feeling its familiar weight. How many times had he watched William clean this weapon, had listened to stories about the war and the frontier justice that this cult had dispensed? All of it tainted now by the knowledge that William Mercer had blood on his hands. "The night he died," Ellis whispered, "your father was trying to back out." He'd finally realized what Morrison really was, what he'd helped create. Morrison had planned one final job, the Territorial Bank in Tucson, the biggest score of his career. But William refused to help, so Morrison killed him. In self-defense, actually. Ellis's admission was barely audible. "Your father drew on Morrison first. William knew Morrison would never let him walk away, so he tried to end it the only way he could think of. Morrison was just faster. The truth was more complex and more terrible than anything Cole had imagined. His father hadn't been an innocent victim. He'd been a willing participant in Morrison's crimes who tried to escape the consequences too late. But he also hadn't been the irredeemable villain that Cole had feared during his darkest moments of doubt. Morrison planted the money to cover his tracks, Ellis continued. But he also planted it to destroy any chance of William being remembered as anything but a criminal. That was the cruelest part, making sure your father would be remembered only for his sins, not for his attempt to make things right. Above them, the last remaining outlaw was moving around nervously, probably trying to decide whether to come down and confirm Morrison's death or simply ride away and hope for the best. Cole barely noticed. His entire world had shifted again, and he was struggling to process the implications. Mary Catherine knew, Ellis said quietly. Not the details, but she knew William was involved with something he shouldn't have been. That's why she never fully believed the story about him being purely innocent. She knew your father was a good man who'd made bad choices, but she also knew you weren't responsible for those choices. Cole thought about Mary Catherine's letter, still unread in his vest pocket. Had she written about this knowledge? Had she tried to prepare him for the truth about his father's complicated legacy? "Thomas found out," Ellis continued. "That's what got him killed. He discovered the connection between your father and Morrison's gang, realized that Morrison had been the real killer. But he also uncovered the extent of William's involvement. Morrison couldn't let that information surface. It would have raised too many questions about the other robberies, about the people who died. So Thomas died for the truth. Just like my father, Thomas died trying to clear your name while preserving your father's memory. He was going to reveal Morrison as the killer, but keep William's involvement secret. He wanted to give you back your life without destroying your image of your father." Ellis's voice was fading fast. "Morrison killed him to protect himself, not just from prosecution, but from having his whole criminal enterprise exposed." Cole holstered his father's gun, feeling its weight differently now. It was still his father's weapon, still carried the memory of the man who taught him to shoot and ride and judge character. But it also carried the burden of William Mercer's crimes and his final, desperate attempt at redemption. "Does this change anything?" Ellis asked, studying Cole's face in the growing darkness. Cole considered the question carefully. Did it change anything to know that his father had been complicit in Morrison's early crimes? Did it matter that William Mercer had been a flawed man who'd made terrible choices before trying to make amends? "He was still my father," Cole said finally. "Still the man who taught me right from wrong, even if he forgot those lessons for a while himself. And he died trying to do the right thing, even if it was too late." Ellis smiled weakly. "I hoped you'd see it that way." From above came the sound of boots on stone as the last outlaw finally worked up the courage to investigate. Cole drew his Colt, his father's Colt, and prepared to finish the fight that William Mercer had started 23 years ago. "One more thing," Ellis whispered urgently. "In Morrison's saddlebags there's a journal. Names, dates, amounts, everything about his gang's activities, including the names of other men he corrupted, other crimes he committed. Make sure it gets to the territorial authorities." Cole nodded, understanding that Ellis was giving him the tools not just to clear his own name, but to expose the full extent of Morrison's criminal network. Justice delayed, perhaps, but not denied. Above them, a nervous voice called out, "Morrison, you down there? Morrison!" Cole looked at Ellis one final time. His friend's breathing was shallow, his face pale, but his eyes held the peace of a man who'd finally told the truth he'd carried for too long. "See you on the other side, partner," Ellis whispered. Cole rose from his crouch, his father's gun steady in his hand, ready to end the nightmare that had begun with his father's first compromise and would end with his son's final stand. Ellis's final badge gleamed dully in the starlight, a new untarnished deputy's star that he'd been saving for a moment that mattered. With trembling hands, he unpinned it from his vest and held it out to Cole, his breathing shallow, but his voice steady with conviction. "Pin this on," Ellis whispered. "If you're going to finish this fight, do it as a lawman. Do it with authority." Cole stared at the badge, understanding the weight of what Ellis was offering. For 23 years, he'd been an outlaw, a man outside the law's protection and beyond its authority. Now Ellis was asking him to step back across that line, to become what he should have been all along, a defender of justice rather than a fugitive from it. "I can't," Cole said quietly. "I don't have the right." "You have every right," Ellis replied firmly. "You've spent 23 years learning what justice really means. You've seen what happens when good men stay silent and bad men prosper. You understand the cost of compromise better than any man I know." Cole took the badge with hands that weren't quite steady. The metal was warm from Ellis's body heat, and its weight seemed to represent all the responsibilities and authorities that came with wearing it. He pinned it to his vest directly over his heart and felt something shift inside him, not just his identity, but his purpose. "Now you're not just Cole Mercer." "Wanted fugitive," Ellis said with satisfaction. "You're Deputy Cole Mercer, duly appointed officer of the law. And everything you do from this moment forward is in service of justice." Above them, the last of Morrison's men was still calling out nervously, trying to determine what had happened to his leader. Cole could hear the fear in the man's voice. Without Morrison's leadership and the promise of easy money, he was just another scared criminal, realizing he was in over his head. 30 seconds, Cole estimated, listening to the footsteps above. "He's working up the courage to come down and look." Ellis nodded weakly, his gun still clutched in both hands, despite his fading strength. "I can give you one good shot, maybe two if I'm lucky. Make them count." Cole checked his ammunition one final time, 3 rounds in his father's Colt, plus the spare cylinder. Against one frightened outlaw, it should be more than enough. But Cole had learned not to take anything for granted in a gunfight. "Ellis," he said quietly, "about Mary Catherine." "You love her," Ellis interrupted gently. "You always have. And if there's any justice in this world, you always will. Don't waste time feeling guilty about it. I made my choice 23 years ago when I stayed silent. I chose protecting her over claiming her, and I've never regretted that choice. The admission carried the weight of a lifetime's sacrifice. Ellis had loved Mary Catherine Sullivan with the same depth and devotion that Cole had, but he'd chosen to step aside when his silence had made Cole's exile necessary. It was a kind of nobility that Cole was only beginning to understand. She would have chosen you anyway, Ellis continued, reading the doubt in Cole's expression. Even if I'd told the truth from the beginning, even if you'd stayed and fought, she would have chosen you. I knew that then and I know it now. How can you be sure? Ellis managed a weak smile. Because I watched her face every time someone mentioned your name. I saw how she looked at the trail leading out of town, hoping to see you riding back. I saw how she kept your father's grave clean when you couldn't be there to do it yourself. His voice grew softer. And I saw how she never looked at me the same way, not once in 23 years. The sound of boots on stone grew closer as the outlaw finally worked up the courage to descend into the wash. Cole positioned himself behind the bridge support, using the massive stonework to provide cover while maintaining a clear field of fire. Beside him, Ellis struggled to prop himself up against the wall, his gun aimed toward the approach route. Remember, Ellis whispered, you're not an outlaw anymore. You're a lawman. That means you give him a chance to surrender before you shoot. Cole nodded, understanding the distinction. It wasn't just about the badge. It was about choosing to be better than the men they were fighting, about upholding the principles that separated civilization from chaos. The outlaw appeared at the edge of their hiding place, moving cautiously with his gun drawn. He was younger than Cole had expected, maybe 25, with the nervous energy of a man who'd gotten in deeper than he'd intended. When he saw Morrison's body, he stopped dead, his face going pale in the starlight. That's far enough, Cole called out, stepping into view with his badge clearly visible. Deputy Cole Mercer, Territorial Marshal's Office. Drop your weapon. The young outlaw's eyes widened as he took in the badge, the gun, and the hard certainty in Cole's voice. For a moment, Cole thought the man might actually surrender. Then greed and desperation won out over common sense. You ain't no deputy. The outlaw snarled, raising his gun. You're Cole Mercer, the wanted man. Morrison told us all about you. Morrison lied about a lot of things, Cole replied calmly. Drop the gun, son. You don't have to die for his mistakes. The outlaw's hand was shaking, his finger tight on the trigger. Cole could see the internal struggle playing out on his young face. Fear warring with greed, desperation fighting against the desire to survive. He promised us $50,000, the outlaw said, his voice cracking. Said it would be easy money, just one big score and we'd all be rich. Morrison's dead, Cole said gently. The money doesn't exist. Even if it did, you'll never live to spend it if you don't put that gun down. For a heartbeat, Cole thought the young man might listen to reason. Then Ellis coughed weakly, drawing the outlaw's attention, and the moment was lost. The young man's gun swung toward the dying sheriff, and Cole had no choice but to act. His father's Colt spoke once, the bullet taking the outlaw center mass. The young man dropped his weapon and fell to his knees, his hands pressed to his chest as blood seeped between his fingers. Why? Cole asked, kneeling beside the dying outlaw. You could have walked away. Needed the money, the young man gasped. My sister, she's sick. Needs medicine, needs a doctor. His eyes were already glazing over. Morrison said this was the only way. Cole felt a familiar weight settle on his shoulders, the burden of taking a life, even in self-defense, even in service of justice. This young man wasn't evil, just desperate and foolish enough to believe Morrison's promises of easy money. What's your name? Cole asked gently. Billy Thornton. The young outlaw's voice was growing weaker. From Prescott. Sister's name is Sarah. Cole nodded, committing the names to memory. When this was over, if he survived, he'd make sure someone in Prescott knew what had happened to Billy Thornton. The young man's sister deserved to know the truth, deserved to know her brother had died trying to help her, even if he'd chosen the wrong way to do it. Billy's eyes fixed on Cole's badge, and for a moment clarity returned to his gaze. You really are a deputy? Yes, Cole said simply. Then maybe you can make sure Sarah gets help. Real help, not stolen money. Billy's breathing was becoming labored. She's at the boarding house on Whiskey Row, Mrs. Henderson's place. Tell her Billy tried to do right. I will, Cole promised, and he meant it. Billy Thornton died with Cole's hand on his shoulder, one more casualty of Morrison's web of lies and corruption. Cole closed the young man's eyes and said a quiet prayer, then turned back to Ellis. The sheriff was barely conscious now, his skin gray and his breathing shallow. But his eyes were alert, and when he saw Cole's expression, he understood what had happened. "Good man," Ellis whispered. "You gave him a chance. That's what matters." Cole knelt beside his dying friend, feeling the weight of everything they'd learned and everything they'd lost. Morrison was dead, his gang scattered or eliminated, but the cost had been high. Too high. "Ellis," Cole said quietly, "I need to know. Is there anyone else? Anyone else Morrison corrupted or threatened?" Ellis nodded weakly. "Journal in his saddlebags. Names, dates, everything. Some of them were like your father. Desperate men who made bad choices. Others were willing partners." He coughed, blood staining his lips. "They all deserve a chance at redemption." Cole looked up toward the bridge, where Morrison's horse waited, saddlebags probably containing a treasure trove of evidence. Justice would be served, not just for his father and Thomas Murphy, but for all of Morrison's victims. "There's something else," Ellis said urgently, gripping Cole's arm with surprising strength. "Mary Catherine, she's in danger." "What do you mean?" "Morrison sent word to his contacts in Copper Creek before he came after me. If something happened to him, they were supposed to—" Ellis's voice failed him for a moment. "They were supposed to make sure Mary Catherine couldn't testify about what Thomas discovered." Cole felt ice water flooding his veins. "How many men?" "2, maybe 3. Local men Morrison bought years ago. They'll move carefully, make it look like an accident," but Cole was already moving, checking his weapons and preparing to leave. But Ellis caught his arm again. "You can't leave me here," Ellis said, not out of fear, but out of practicality. Morrison's journal, his confession letter, someone has to get them to the authorities. "If you leave them here and something happens to you," Cole understood. The evidence of Morrison's crimes and Cole's innocence couldn't be left to chance. But Mary Catherine was in immediate danger, and every minute counted. "Can you ride?" Cole asked, though he already knew the answer. Ellis managed a weak laugh. "Not a chance, but I can stay conscious long enough to make sure these papers get where they need to go." "Ellis, Cole," the sheriff's voice carried absolute authority despite his weakness. "Go to her, save her. That's what matters now. I'll handle the rest." Cole hesitated, torn between loyalty to his friend and desperate concern for Mary Catherine. Ellis seemed to read his thoughts. "I've been dying for hours," Ellis said gently. "Nothing's going to change that. But Mary Catherine is alive and in danger, and you're the only one who can save her. Don't let Morrison win from beyond the grave." Cole nodded, understanding that Ellis was right. Justice meant nothing if the innocent weren't protected. He gathered Morrison's confession letter and the journal from the Outlaw's saddlebags, making sure Ellis had copies of the most important documents. "When someone finds you," Cole said, "tell them Deputy Cole Mercer went to Copper Creek to prevent a murder. Tell them everything we've discovered. Make sure the truth gets told." Ellis smiled, and for a moment he looked like the young man Cole had known decades ago. "It will be told. I promise you that." Cole mounted Socorro, his mind already racing ahead to Copper Creek and the woman who'd waited 23 years for justice. Behind him, Ellis settled back against the bridge support, Morrison's journal clutched to his chest and his gun ready in case any more of the Outlaw's associates appeared. "Cole!" Ellis called out as he prepared to ride. "Tell Mary Catherine I kept my promise. Tell her I finally did the right thing." Cole nodded, then spurred Socorro into a gallop toward Copper Creek and whatever waited there. He was no longer running from his past. He was racing toward his future, badge gleaming on his chest and his father's gun ready at his side. The boy who'd fled in shame 23 years ago was gone forever. In his place rode Deputy Cole Mercer, lawman and protector, riding hard to save the woman he'd never stopped loving. Cole's father's Bible lay hidden beneath the floorboards of the old schoolhouse, right where William Mercer had told his son to look if anything ever happened to him. Cole remembered the conversation now, filed away in the back of his memory like so many childhood instructions that seemed unimportant at the time. If there's ever trouble, son, real trouble, check under the third board from the window in the old schoolhouse. There's something there that might help. Cole had reached Copper Creek just as the sun was setting, Socorro lathered with sweat from their hard ride across the desert. The town looked smaller than he remembered, weathered by time and economic hardship. Many of the buildings stood empty now, their windows dark and their paint peeling. The railroad's decision to bypass Copper Creek had slowly strangled the life out of the community. But the schoolhouse was still there, still maintained, despite the town's decline. Cole could see light in the windows. Mary Catherine was inside, probably grading papers or preparing lessons for the handful of children whose families hadn't yet given up on Copper Creek's future. He dismounted quietly, his hand resting on his father's gun. Ellis had said Morrison's men would be careful, would make Mary Catherine's death look like an accident. That meant they were probably already in position, watching and waiting for the right moment to strike. Cole circled the schoolhouse carefully, using the shadows and his knowledge of the terrain to remain unseen. 23 years of living as a fugitive had taught him how to move without being detected, how to read the signs that marked the presence of dangerous men. He found them positioned behind the old oak tree that had shaded the schoolyard for as long as anyone could remember. Two men, both armed with rifles, both focused on the schoolhouse windows. Cole recognized them both, Jake Hutchinson, whose father had owned the general store, and Pete Morrison, Jack Morrison's younger brother who'd stayed in Copper Creek after the gang leader left. The sight of Pete Morrison sent a chill down Cole's spine. The family resemblance was unmistakable. The same cold eyes, the same cruel mouth. But where Jack Morrison had been cunning and charismatic, Pete was simply vicious, the kind of man who enjoyed causing pain for its own sake. Cole moved closer, using the darkening sky as cover. He could hear their conversation now, low voices discussing the best way to eliminate their target. Sheriff said, "Make it look natural," Jake was saying. "Maybe a fire, make it seem like she knocked over a lamp." "Fire's too risky," Pete replied. "Too many ways it could spread, bring too much attention. Better to wait until she's walking home. Make it look like she fell and hit her head." Cole felt his jaw tighten. They were discussing Mary Catherine's murder with the casual indifference most men reserved for planning a trip to the general store. These weren't desperate men driven to violence by circumstance. They were killers who'd been waiting for an excuse to indulge their darker natures. He remembered his father's Bible then, the conversation about checking under the floorboards if there was ever real trouble. Cole had been too young to understand what William Mercer had been trying to tell him, but now it made perfect sense. His father had kept evidence of his involvement with Morrison's gang, insurance against the day when the outlaw leader might turn on his associates. Moving carefully, Cole made his way to the back of the schoolhouse. The rear entrance was unlocked. Mary Catherine had always trusted in the basic goodness of people, even when that trust wasn't warranted. Cole slipped inside, his boots silent on the familiar wooden floors. The schoolhouse looked exactly as he remembered it. Rows of simple desks, a blackboard covered with arithmetic problems, shelves lined with well-worn books. And there at the front of the room stood Mary Catherine Sullivan. She was older now, her auburn hair touched with silver and her face marked by the years of loss and loneliness. But she was still beautiful, still carried herself with the quiet dignity that had captured Cole's heart when they were both young. She looked up as he entered, and for a moment time seemed suspended between them. "Cole," she said quietly, and her voice carried 23 years of longing, hope and patient love. "Hello, Mary Catherine," he replied, his own voice rough with emotion. She moved toward him slowly, as if afraid he might disappear if she moved too quickly. Her eyes took in the deputy's badge on his chest, the gun at his side, the hard-won confidence that came from surviving decades in the wilderness. "Ellis told me you might come," she said, stopping just out of arm's reach. "He said you'd learn the truth about your father, about Morrison. There's more truth to learn," Cole said, pulling out his father's Bible. "And there are men outside who want to make sure you never get the chance to tell it." Mary Catherine's eyes widened as she understood the danger they were in. But instead of fear, Cole saw determination in her gaze, the same strength that had sustained her through years of waiting and loss. "Then we'd better find what your father hid," she said practically, "before it's too late." Mary Catherine's letter to Cole had waited 23 years to be read, its pages yellow with age, but its words as fresh as the day she'd written them. As Cole pried up the third floorboard from the window, Mary Catherine pulled the folded paper from her apron pocket, the same letter Ellis had carried, the same words she'd been too afraid to send when Cole first disappeared. "Read it later," she said softly, pressing the letter into his hands. "When we're safe, when we have time to talk about what it means." But Cole opened it anyway, needing to see her words before the violence that was coming. The handwriting was young Mary Catherine's, careful and precise, but the emotions bleeding through the ink were timeless. "My dearest Cole, I know you didn't kill anyone. I know your father was a good man who lost his way, but died trying to find it again. I know you ran because you loved me too much to let me share your danger. But I want you to know that I would have shared it gladly. I would have stood beside you against the world if you'd let me. I'm carrying your child, and whether you come back or not, I'll love this baby, because it's part of you. I'll wait as long as I have to wait. I'll believe in your innocence until my dying day. And if you never return, I'll make sure our child knows what kind of man his father really is. Come home when you can. We'll face whatever comes together. All my love." Mary Catherine Cole's hands trembled as he folded the letter carefully. The child, their child, lost because of Morrison's lies and Cole's flight into the desert. Another casualty of the violence that had started with his father's first compromise. "I'm sorry," Mary Catherine said quietly, watching his face. "I lost the baby 2 months after you left. The grief, the stress—" "Don't," Cole said firmly. "Don't apologize for anything. You did nothing wrong. None of this was your fault." Beneath the floorboard, they found his father's Bible, a worn leather volume with a hidden compartment carved into its pages. Inside was a collection of documents that told the complete story of William Mercer's involvement with Morrison's gang. Receipts for information payments, maps of bank layouts, schedules of payroll deliveries. Everything needed to prove that William Mercer had indeed been complicit in Morrison's crimes. But there was something else. A letter in William's handwriting, addressed to Cole. "Son, if you're reading this, then the worst has happened and I'm dead. I've made terrible mistakes, choices I can't take back. I let desperation drive me to help men I should have opposed. Good people died because of information I provided, and I'll carry that guilt to my grave. But I want you to know that I died trying to make it right. Morrison threatened our family, threatened our town, and I couldn't live with that anymore. When you read this, I'll be gone, but maybe my death will buy you and Mary Catherine the safety I couldn't provide in life. Don't let my sins define you, son. Be the man I should have been. Love Mary Catherine the way she deserves to be loved. Live the life I threw away." Your father, William Mercer Cole, closed the Bible carefully, understanding at last the full complexity of his father's legacy. William Mercer had been neither the saint Cole had believed him to be, nor the irredeemable sinner he'd feared. He'd been a flawed man who'd made terrible choices but died trying to make amends. "They're moving," Mary Catherine said quietly, peering out the window. "The men outside, they're coming closer." Cole checked his weapons one final time. His father's Colt, the Derringer Ellis had given him, and now his father's truth to fight for. Outside, Jake Hutchinson and Pete Morrison were approaching the schoolhouse with the confidence of predators who believed their prey was trapped. "Stay behind the desk," Cole told Mary Catherine. "Whatever happens, stay down until it's over." She nodded, but as Cole moved toward the door, she caught his arm. "Cole," she said quietly, "I want you to know I never stopped loving you. Not for a single day in 23 years. He turned back to her, seeing not just the woman she'd become, but the girl she'd been, the future they'd planned, the life they'd lost and might yet reclaim. "I never stopped loving you either," he said simply. The front door of the schoolhouse burst open as Pete Morrison kicked it in, his rifle ready and murder in his eyes. Behind him came Jake Hutchinson, nervous but committed to the violence they'd planned. Well, Pete sneered, seeing Cole's badge. "Look what we got here." The famous Cole Mercer come home to play lawman. "It's over, Pete," Cole said calmly. "Your brother's dead. The gang's finished. You can walk away from this." Pete laughed, the sound ugly in the quiet schoolhouse. "Walk away? After 23 years of waiting for this moment?" "I don't think so, Deputy." Cole's hand moved to his gun as Pete raised his rifle, and in that moment 23 years of running ended as Cole Mercer finally stood his ground. The simple wooden cross that marked Ellis Caldwell's grave stood straight and proud in the Copper Creek Cemetery, its craftsmanship reflecting the care with which Cole had carved every letter of his friend's name. 3 months had passed since that terrible night under the bridge. 3 months since justice had finally come to Copper Creek in the form of a deputy's badge and a father's truth. Cole visited the grave every morning before beginning his rounds as the town's new sheriff. The position had been offered to him by the territorial governor himself, who'd read Ellis's final report and Morrison's journal with growing amazement. The corruption had run deeper than anyone had imagined. 3 banks, 2 mining companies, and half a dozen ranches had all suffered losses due to information William Mercer had provided to Morrison's gang. But the governor had also seen the courage it took for Cole to expose his own father's crimes, and the dedication Ellis had shown in finally telling the truth. "Morning, partner," Cole said quietly, placing a handful of wildflowers at the base of the cross. "Thought you'd like to know. Billy Thornton's sister is doing well. Doc Murphy says the medicine from Denver should have her back on her feet in a month or 2. The wind rustled through the desert sage, carrying the scent of rain from the distant mountains. It had been a good spring in Copper Creek, with enough moisture to bring the desert into bloom, and enough hope to bring families back to a town that had nearly died. Pete Morrison won't be bothering anyone anymore," Cole continued. "Judge sentenced him to hang for Thomas Murphy's murder. Jake Hutchinson got 10 years for conspiracy, but he'll probably serve half that if he keeps helping us track down the rest of Morrison's network." The final confrontation in the schoolhouse had been brief but decisive. Pete Morrison's arrogance had made him careless, and Cole's years of survival had made him fast. One shot from his father's Colt had ended the Morrison family's reign of terror forever. Jake Hutchinson had surrendered immediately afterward, too frightened to continue fighting alone. Cole pulled out his father's pocket watch, repaired now and keeping perfect time. The hands that had stopped at the moment of William Mercer's death now measured the passage of days filled with purpose and peace. It was nearly time for lunch, which meant Mary Catherine would be waiting at the schoolhouse with the meal she'd packed for both of them. They'd married 6 weeks ago, in a simple ceremony conducted by the circuit judge in the same schoolhouse where they'd first fallen in love as children. Mary Catherine had worn her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit her mature figure, and Cole had worn his best suit with his deputy's badge pinned over his heart. The whole town had attended, all 37 residents of Copper Creek, and even the governor had sent a telegram of congratulations. Their honeymoon had been a week in Santa Fe, staying at the finest hotel and eating at restaurants where the food came on real china plates. But both of them had been eager to return to Copper Creek, to the life they were building together in the town that had shaped them both. Cole rose from Ellis's grave and walked slowly through the cemetery, noting the other markers that told the story of Copper Creek's struggles. Thomas Murphy's headstone bore the inscription, "Beloved husband and father, who died seeking justice." Mary Catherine visited it every Sunday after church, bringing flowers and sharing news of the town Thomas had loved. Near the back of the cemetery, under a spreading cottonwood, stood William Mercer's grave. Cole had commissioned a new headstone to replace the simple wooden cross that had marked the spot for 23 years. The inscription read, "William Mercer, beloved father. He made mistakes, but died, trying to make them right." The truth about his father's involvement with Morrison's gang had been difficult for the town to accept, but Cole had insisted on complete honesty. The people of Copper Creek deserved to know the whole story, not just the parts that were comfortable to hear. Some had struggled with the revelation that William Mercer hadn't been the simple victim they'd believed him to be, but most had come to understand that good men could make bad choices and still find redemption in the end. Cole made his way to the schoolhouse, where he could see Mary Catherine through the window, organizing papers at her desk. She looked up as he approached, and the smile that lit her face reminded him of the girl she'd been when they were both young and certain that love could conquer anything. "How was your morning, Sheriff Mercer?" she asked, using the title with gentle teasing. "Quiet," Cole replied, kissing her cheek. "Just the way I like it." They shared their lunch in comfortable silence, watching through the windows as the children of Copper Creek played in the schoolyard. There weren't many of them. Only 8 students between the ages of 6 and 14, but their laughter filled the air with hope for the town's future. "I have news," Mary Catherine said quietly, her hand moving instinctively to her stomach. Cole looked at her, reading the joy and nervousness in her expression. "Good news?" "The best news," she confirmed. "Dr. Patterson confirmed it this morning. We're going to have a baby, Cole. Our baby." For a moment, Cole couldn't speak. The child they'd lost 23 years ago. The family they'd been denied by Morrison's lies and his own flight into the desert. It was all being offered to them again. A second chance at the happiness they'd thought was lost forever. "Are you happy?" Mary Catherine asked, suddenly uncertain. Cole pulled her into his arms, feeling the completeness that had eluded him for so long. "I'm home," he said simply. Finally, truly home. Outside, Boone lay sleeping in the shade of the schoolhouse steps, his graying muzzle resting on his paws. The old dog had adapted well to town life, becoming a beloved fixture in Copper Creek and a gentle guardian to the children who attended Mary Catherine's school. As the afternoon sun slanted through the schoolhouse windows, Cole thought about Ellis's words under the bridge. "Tell her I finally did the right thing." Ellis had kept his promise, had found the courage to speak the truth that set them all free. And now, in this quiet classroom where their story had begun, Cole and Mary Catherine were writing its next chapter, not as fugitives or victims, but as husband and wife, building a future worthy of all the sacrifices that had brought them home.